up here is not working.
There's no going back. I don't think that we're ever going to, there's no such thing as going back. Going back to what?
It's my problem. It's our problem. We all face it. And I don't know what the answer is, but I know where the answer lies. You know where the answer lies?
It is no longer even thriving. It's not even trying to survive. So the industry has been faced with choices that we've never had to face before.
And 77% of professionals say they're burnt out in their current job. So what does that say? I mean, who's responsible for that?
We can't leave our jobs because economically, that's really not a choice, because there are a lot of jobs that are being eliminated. There are a lot of jobs that are going away. So not only am I dissatisfied, but I also can't leave right now because economically, this is not a really good time to leave and go look for another job.
People are feeling a lot of anxiety, a lot of threat. Leaders have to fill that gap.
Potentially losing money. We're also in an economic downturn. Maybe our stocks are really bad. And so now you want me
The
to...
hard choices of letting go of certain things,
Yeah.
and then choosing what is it that they're going to really fight for no matter what.
Yeah.
You cannot take that stance unless you start with... Welcome everyone to Disrupt the Podcast with Andrés Tapia and
Eloiza Domingo.
where we challenge conventional thinking and look at the new ways that are shaping our future.
We're going to deep dive into exploring leadership in the era of disruption.
Well, and to just kick us off,
Sure.
Eloiza, do you realize, according to a Korn Ferry study, which I came from recently, only 10% of leaders feel equipped to lead through this era of disruption?
Which means that 90% of us have no clue what we're doing.
9 out of 10.
Nine out of 10, which also means that, so everything is changing. Disruption is huge. So why do you think that only 10% of leaders?
Well, let's actually
ready.
unpack that a little bit, right? I think there's two reasons. One, I think that in many ways this is an era of shamelessness in leadership, and there is a lot of extortion going on, and leaders of character are facing pressures and temptations they've never faced before, with huge implications.
Yeah, and consequences.
And
absolutely.
consequences.
Yep.
And many of them are buckling in the way that
Yeah.
they wish they weren't.
Yeah.
So I think, for one, I think that, and in that, how do you respond, right?
Yep.
And I believe that also in an era of disruption where the world is off kilter, leaders just don't know how to navigate that because there's so many things outside their control, whether it's climate or politics or technology. But I think I know, and we know, some of the ways that leaders can sort of find their way as leaders in an era of disruption.
Yeah, and one of the things that there's the quote that you mentioned earlier, that only 10% of leaders are equipped to lead in an era of sustained disruption, because I think there's a difference between having kind of immediate, something like a crisis, for example,
yeah,
exactly, versus like right now, as you mentioned, this idea of extortion in leadership, shamelessness in leadership. This is unfortunately a sustained place of disruption, and is probably going to be for several more years.
Yeah, and the sustained is not just because of the climate,
No.
social climate or political climate, but disruption, whether it's climate-based or technology-based, is going to be here for. It's here. It's just a way of life. It's not like, hey, let's ride this out until it's over. It's not going to be over. So we have to lead as a disruption. It's just part of life and work.
Right. Well, and the other thing too, and you and I just talked about this in the car, is this idea that I think a lot of people, like with COVID, for example, everybody says, oh, after COVID, we were going to go, I wonder when we're going to go back to normal. But I think that we're still working on that one. But also, to your point, this idea of sustained disruption, the disruption that we're in right now, I don't think that we're ever going to, there's no such thing as going back to what, And so that is certainly kind of this challenge to the leadership, to be like, so not only are you having to shift right now and figure out what is the actual core of me being a leader, but there's no going back.
Yeah, and often we think about leadership and disruption. We say, let's get through this crisis.
Correct.
Let's get to the other side, and it's sort of a narrative arc and a leadership arc, and we got to the other side.
Yeah,
right?
and
you see the disaster movies or whatever, and within 2 hours, it's played out and done, right? But this, whether it's 2 hours or 2 months or 2 years, actually disruption is continual and will continue to be that way. So that means that we're not talking about crises leadership,
no,
which actually is one of your specialties.
Yes, it is, right.
But we're talking about something different.
Yeah.
We're talking about leading through sustained disruption as a default of leadership.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to ask you the question again. Why do you think that only 10% of leaders feel equipped?
Yeah, well, let me answer it by talking about what I think leadership needs today.
Okay.
And then I think we'll back into the why.
Okay.
I think that what is our response to an era of shamelessness? I think it's character. As we've seen, some leaders of character buckle against very understandable pressures. We've seen other leaders not buckle. Think Columbia University versus Harvard. They both faced the same kind of pressures, but one buckled and the other one didn't. And I believe that, I'm not saying that leaders were not leaders of character, but they weren't able to sustain leading with character when the threats seemed existential.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So I think that's one reason why character is essential. The other reason why I think character is essential is that when the world is spinning off its axis and off kilter like a top, due to forces that we cannot control as individual leaders, what is the one thing we can't control? Ourselves, right? So I think that in this era of disruption and off-kilter world, let's first center ourselves as leaders. And to center ourselves requires being leaders of character, really understanding our purpose and who we are authentically. And only then can we confront the paradoxes, the existential threats, the temptations, and the seemingly impossible situations that organizations find themselves in.
Yeah. I don't think that you're saying that in an era of sustained disruption, that if somebody has to make a really hard choice, that they're not a leader of character. But the reason I'm saying this is because I want to acknowledge that in spaces where sometimes like industries are faced, our past industry has been faced with unparalleled stress, where it is no longer even thriving. It's not even trying to survive. It's trying to survive, but it's not. So the industry has been faced with choices that we've never had to face before. And so when leaders have to dismantle their own programs, it doesn't mean that you're not a leader of character. It's that you're in a really unique, sustained era of disruption.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think because we're facing seemingly impossible choices, and I want us to talk about paradox and not dilemma. So dilemma implies it's this or that. That's A or B. But paradox means that two things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
And an example of that is that we can fight for what is right and good and principled, and at the same time tactically retreat from certain things because they're not defensible, not morally or value-wise, but because of legal issues or because of political things or because of just lack of funds or because things have been cut. So, but in order for a leader to really manage the paradox that they face and the hard choices of letting go of certain things and then choosing what is it that they're going to really fight for no matter what, in order to really take that stance, you cannot take that stance unless you start with who am I? And why am I here? And what's this organization about? And what is my commitment to the value and the mission of the organization? And then, as I look at the triage of what we got to rescue and what we got to let go of, you can't make that decision unless you've done the character work first.
And so thank you because for me, I think that is so critical. That idea of paradigm versus dilemma, I think that's so important. Paradox versus dilemma, and I think that that's so important, especially as we kind of face. This is such a complicated topic, and there are so many of our listeners out there that are like, I think that given the society that we're in right now and given some of the stresses that we're in, there is a forced polarization. I have to do this. I can't, there's no way I can do this. It's like, but what you've just said, which I think is amazing, Andrés, you've allowed our listeners and everyone out there to say, but you can.
Exactly.
But you can.
That's the problem that we're backed into by the forces that are around us. It's forced us into dilemmas.
I agree with that.
And into, are you pro or con? Are you this or that? Point. Are you blue or you're red?
Yeah, great
right?
Point.
And how are you going to resolve this dilemma? A or B? And I'm saying the way through is to not fall into the trap that it's either or, but it can be both and, but it requires discernment about what the both and the and is going to be. And in that, you got to sort out what you let go of and what you don't. But these don't have to be, seemingly paradoxically contradictory things can actually coexist.
So, okay, so I'm gonna push a little bit. So, okay, so you're pushing our listeners to think about character in the era of character and leadership in the era of sustained disruption. Okay, we also admit that there are 10% of leaders who are not prepared to do this. So they say 10% of leaders who are prepared. I'm sorry. So 9 out of 10 are not. And they say, okay, Andres and Eloiza, like, I want to try to figure this out. Here's the thing, though. Authenticity is also kind of a variable here. So all of a sudden, you've got these leaders who are figuring out their character in a space of dilemma or paradox or whatever how you want to say it, and their employees are like, "Who the heck are you? You're just coming up with character all of a sudden because like we're in a space of crisis or dilemma or whatever. Like how is somebody going to tackle their desire to be authentic when potentially they were making decisions based off of a dilemma?"
Right, but I think now we got to talk about the trust gap.
Okay.
Because right now, leaders are having a hard time leading. And we see it in the results, right? That means 70% of U.S. employees, according to Gallup, are disengaged today, right? And only 21% say the performance is managed in a way that motivates outstanding work. I mean, this is like, where's the energy, that we want from the, organization's greatest assets from their people when they feel disengaged and they'll feel that they're managed to do their best work.
Yeah.
And that is actually the outcome of ineffective leadership.
Yeah.
And then the other thing we need to say, and let me tell you 2 more statistics and let's get back to the conversation. 60% of Americans report feeling lonely on a regular basis, according to the U.S. Surgeon General, and 77% of professionals say they're burnt out in their current job. So what does that say? I mean, who's responsible for that?
Yeah.
And ultimately, leaders are not taking care of the greatest assets. I mean, if your machinery was breaking down that way,
you would absolutely
you
take
would
care of
take
it.
care of it.
You would
And
absolutely take care
your
of it.
people are breaking down that way. So your people are feeling, I feel disengaged, I feel lonely, I feel not managed to my greatest capacity, right?
And what's interesting about that, Andres, and you know this, given the economic environment that we're in, if 77% of our workers say, I feel disengaged, I feel burnt out, but the thing is that we can't, our employees can't self-select out. We can't leave our jobs because economically, that's really not a choice right now. I mean, I can't not have a job because there are a lot of jobs that are being eliminated. There are a lot of jobs that are going away, so not only am I dissatisfied, but I also can't leave right now because economically, this is not a really good time to leave and go look for another job.
Yeah, but the workers' dilemma becomes the leader's opportunity.
Correct. Yeah.
Because the leader's opportunity is, I see that my greatest asset is broken right now. And a lot of it has to do with emotional realities, right? And so, we can offer AI, we can offer even good benefits, we can offer, a good place to work physically. But if we're not leading them in an era of disruption where people are feeling, a lot of anxiety, a lot of threat because of who they are and kind of how changing technology could affect or not affect their jobs, then leaders have to fill that gap. And again, this is very humane work. This is, even though we got to emphasize outcomes, because that's really the biggest priority right now, outcomes and efficiency and output and competitive advantage, all those hard edge things which must remain. But if you don't do it in a humane way that really responds to the needs of your people, in ways that speak to their anxiety, but also their aspirations, then we are not leading well. But to lead humanely brings me back to, you got to lead with character.
Yes. So I'm gonna get, one of the things about the Disrupt podcast is we also want to be realistic. We also want to take, theories into real practices, right? So if I'm interviewing you and I'm a leader that you're executive coaching, and I would say, okay, so what does that even mean? So you want me to lead with humanity. You want me to lead with character. My employees are burnt out. 77% of them are burnt out. They're a captive audience, so because they're not going to leave, which means that my retention is up. So plus on me, right? But my satisfaction is down. They're not really productive employees because they're also not happy. Right. And so now, Andres, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah, and again, if you have a retention that may not be high because people can't leave, but they're not producing.
Right, correct.
Then that's not a desirable state, right?
Right.
And I think that as complicated as our world has gotten, the more complicated it gets, I think the simpler the answer gets. It's not simple to implement, but it's simple to grasp. If my greatest asset is hurting and broken and cracked, I got to take care of it. And how do we take care of other human beings? They need to feel listened to and cared for. They need to feel empathy. And they all aspire to do great work, and they need to be inspired to do the work. And I think that becomes today's work of leadership more than ever, has to be prioritized on those things that require the kind of character where you can lead with kindness, you can lead with humility, you can lead with gratitude, for what people bring every day. And you can lead with empathy, and you can also lead by role modeling courage and resilience. I think those are the fundamentals that I think we are required for that 90% that's struggling to lead in this time of disruption, sustained disruption, that these are some fundamental things that are not complicated to grasp, but require discipline and intention to execute.
So I was just at a marketing and communications conference, and I spoke about crisis leadership, and they were talking about crisis communication and authenticity. And a lot of our marketing communications, particularly PR teams, social media teams for organizations, internal communications teams, they struggle with how to support their leaders to do exactly what you just said, right? Because here's the thing. I agree. I'm going to get a little bit more tactical here. Theoretically, yes. Like most of the organizations that I speak to say, absolutely, we want our leaders to be perceived as leaders of character, that they are leading authentically, that they're leading with kindness, that they're leading with humanity. So on the ground, what does that actually look like? Well, like if I'm writing something for them as a communications person, what strategically does that look like? So for example, like I gave an example when I was at a former employer. They actually really liked this at this conference. One of our leaders, he had a team of, I think, like 20 people. And his staff meetings were weekly. And every third staff meeting, he would say, I can't remember what his name was, just say it was John. He would say laundry. It was laundry staff day, because it was all in COVID. And so we didn't really understand what it meant. And so he said, listen, I know that you all work at home. We all have laundry. We all have stuff. And I'm just going to acknowledge, the fact that this is a really weird space that we're in right now. We used to all go to one building. And so I don't know about you, but I've also got laundry, to do. So here's the thing. We have a staff meeting to do. You've got laundry to do. So do we. So why don't we just every third staff meeting, bring your laundry and we'll fold it together. The only thing he said, I don't want any like unmentionables, or things like that on screen. And a lot of the staff were like, what? There was like 15 of us, right? 20 of us. And many of us didn't do it at first, but he did it. And he set up his little camera, and he was like, and if you closed your eyes, it was the same exact meeting. There was still the agenda and stuff. Over time, we kept doing it. And people really did bring their laundry. And it was like, oh, hey, yeah, I know. Yeah. And it was, so we got stuff done. He led with humanity. It was something very, very small. And it was just a little, very small, like acknowledgement of like, I know this is weird, but you know what? Like, why don't we just lean into the weirdness, lean into disruption, but we still have to get stuff done. And the only reason I bring that up is because like, as I'm listening to you, and again, I realize that I tend to be a very kind of, what does that mean for me now? How can I use that now? I remember that, and it was like just instinctively I was like, wow, like that felt really good. Like
and John, who whoever he is, but what he did was something very basic and human. We all had to do our laundry, and that was the power of the symbolism of what he did. It was pragmatic, but it was symbolic, right? Life goes on. That we all have to fold our laundry, right? And it's something that we all share regardless of whether you're a leader or not. And I think that's humility.
And I also think, not to, keep going on this particular, but I also think for me, being on his team, and for many of us who talked about it, it was also a very kind of silent acknowledgement that I realize that this whole thing is kind of weird, but it's also kind of burning us all out. When you get off the phone, you've got to be mom or dad or partner or whatever. And so if I could potentially just kind of double down on that and help you with that, maybe when you leave, you won't have all of that laundry. We've gotten some stuff done.
And it's recognizing the very practical needs
Exactly.
that we have. And that's what
Exactly.
empathy looks
Yep.
like.
Yep.
It's not that complicated.
It's not.
But you have to, like
John did.
make it deliberate
Yeah.
and conscious.
Yeah. And create, and I think that's the hard, honestly, I think that's the hardest part after speaking again with like communications teams, PR teams, social media teams. It really is amazing to me how difficult they're like, I don't know how to do this.
But here's where it's not about the tactics. And you can call folding laundry as a team as a tactic, but no. The deeper issue is for leaders to be more human themselves. He acknowledged that he had laundry needs to fold. He needed to multitask. And then he was able to be empathetic. Said, well, that's the need everybody else has. So let me meet my need. Let me acknowledge I have that need. And let's open up other people and their space for everybody to meet that need.
Yeah.
So it was and imagine if he's doing it in that, well, then he's doing it in other ways as well.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So, I mean, what did he do in terms of how did he acknowledge just the dilemmas and weirdness that COVID provided at that time? What else did he do?
Yeah. I mean, well, it's actually interesting that you said that because as a result of that, I do think that on his team, it allowed other people to see, like you said, to see him as human, to then go to him and be open enough to say, hey, listen, like, you know, this is my schedule. I know it's kind of weird. And it opened up a different avenue of trust, actually, you know, and it was like, wow, he is human, authentic, you know, he's kind of like just like me, you know. But I do think, I mean, you know, this idea of leadership, and you and I have been leaders, you know, in various ways, leaders of people, leaders of projects. We're taught, though, Andrés, to be here, you know.
That we have to break and disrupt that paradigm.
I agree.
Right? Because up here is not working.
No.
Right? Because down here, people need to be seen and felt and understood, right?
Yeah.
And elevated and inspired. And the only way to disrupt that is for leaders who are up here to come to where people are at. And not in a condescending way, oh, poor you. It's like come down because they have the need. They acknowledge that they're hurting, that they're uncertain, that they don't know how to lead, and that the answer lies in the team. And that requires a great deal of humility.
Yeah. So, and the reason I say that is because we were taught this way. So again, we are asking people to shift their paradigm, shift how, you know, they've led in the past. I wonder how difficult it is.
Well, it's very difficult
for people to do that. I wonder also for somebody to sit down and to, like you said, examine their own humanity, examine their own humility, vulnerability, and then you're juxtaposing that to potentially all of the statistics that we just read. We potentially are also losing money. We're also in an economic downturn. Maybe our stocks are really bad. And so now you want me to do what exactly? You know?
So, and I quickly said that's very difficult, but it is difficult when you hold on to the paradigm. That's what makes it difficult, because don't make yourself vulnerable, you know, don't expose yourself. And so as long as we hold on to it, it seems impossible. But there's something very liberating to let go. And we talk about disruption. The disruption is that instead of holding on, it's to simply let go. And then the letting go is a freedom. And if I can let go of appearances, if I can let go of trying to come across as real strong and without needs, not only does it open others to maybe feel seen and given permission, but you are seen different.
Yeah.
When we see that kind of burnout statistics and low engagement statistics, and I'm not able to bring my best self to work and produce, that means that I'm working in a place where I don't trust my leaders. I don't trust the organization. And so what is trust about? Trust is simply, on a one-to-one basis, is that you're someone that will have my best interests in mind, and therefore you're trustworthy. How do you build trust without doing acts of trust building, which has to do with what we just talked about, folding laundry together.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think what's important as you're saying this, I'm thinking back to my time as a leader. I know for me, I felt a lot of pressure to uphold what you just said, to uphold like, we're good, we're strong, we're fine. It is that, you know, we're okay. It's that PR, you know, piece. And then you go back to a room and like, we are not fine. Like, I have no clue what we're doing, you know? And as a result of that, I know for me, when I would fill out, you know, employee surveys, because they were technically anonymous, right? Or confidential. It was like, I don't know how happy I am, you know? I don't, because potentially I'm not feeling that I can be honest because I've got to protect the company. I've got to do this, which is part of our role, right? But at the same time, I could imagine that also breaks down humanity, your own humanity.
And therefore trust, because guess what? When you're pretending to be okay, your people are seeing right through it.
I agree.
Right? So like, she's not trustworthy.
Yeah.
So now flip it. And this is a part of where we need each other. The world is in so much disruption. Leaders are facing things they've never faced before. You know, leaders are forced to figure out what to do when they don't know what to do. So where's the answer? The answer is not in the leader only. The answer is in the team. And the role of the leader is to open up the challenge that we all face so that we can get the diversity of thinking, you know, the diversity of life experiences, the diversity of personality, right? And function area and skill set to say, put the problem on the table. It's my problem. It's our problem. We all face it. I, as a leader, am not sure exactly how to move, and I don't know what the answer is, but I know where the answer lies. You know where the answer lies? Inside ourselves, but it also lies in that diversity of that team. And let's leverage that to work our way through it. But in order to work through it, we have to be vulnerable. But in that vulnerability is the power.
You know, one of the things I know that, you know, one of the things that we always promise our listeners is making sure that we kind of give them kind of things to take away, whether it's practical or just thought-provoking or both, right? One of the things that I like that you're saying and we're saying is this idea that, you know, sometimes it just takes one, right? Sometimes it just takes the one leader. Because here's the thing, and you know this, Andrés, you and I have been in board meetings, we've been amongst our peers where it's like, who's going to crack? Who's going to be actually human, you know? And then when somebody, if John says something about laundry, we all kind of look around and we're like, oh, come on, John. You know, so it's that culture, that corporate culture of like, that's not leader, what are you doing? That's weird, you know, because there's some unspoken rule that we're supposed to be hard, that we're supposed to be this, we're supposed to protect the company. But in the era of disruption, I think that's what we're asking our listeners to think about, especially if you're a leader, especially that you know these stats, is to say sometimes you do, even with all of this pressure around you, your peers in particular, to say, you know what, I'm going to do laundry with my employees, or I'm going to ask my employees, you know, what's going on. I need to leverage a little bit of that.
Exactly. And I think that leads us to a really key corollary here. Don't just be a leader of your people on your team. Be a leader of leaders, a leader among leaders.
Exactly.
Because no one, in the same way that no one leader can do it without their team, no one leader can do it without other leaders. Because you got to, at a scalable basis, transform the norms and practices and mindsets in the status quo of how leadership has happened.
Exactly.
That we have to break the back of that. We have to disrupt it so that the
Exactly.
collective, it's not just, because we're not asking John to be the hero. And the only one said, oh my God, look at John only. Right. It's like, we want John to role model for his team and for his peers and to influence his peers.
That's exactly right.
To say the breakthrough is here. In us.
Well, and I think from what I've seen, let's just keep using John. One of the things that I saw after John did that is there was an allowance to his peers, a permission given to his peers. Intrinsically he didn't ask for permission, he just did it, you know. I do believe that he is a person of character. I've known him for a long time. But by just making that shift and by using that as an example or doing his example, he actually gave permission to the other leaders intrinsically, because the other leaders were like, oh, okay, like, so wait a second, like, we don't think any less of John. You know, his team actually seems a lot more engaged. That's interesting. You know, They also got their laundry done. That's weird.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I wanna
but
get my laundry
I know,
done too.
wanna
I
get
have
my
laundry
done
also, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
they also got their agenda done.
Exactly.
Like, so there was no risk in terms of like the business. There was no risk in business, but there was actually a gain in right? If we want to put it in corporate terms. And so I think what intrinsically happened is that by disrupting not just what you're doing with your team, but with other leaders among leaders, what you just said earlier, you are then giving others permission to be like, it's okay.
Yeah, and then
It's okay.
And then just moving on along beyond that one example, what does that example tell us? That there's peer influence by role modeling, but I still believe that it also takes a proactive intentionality, not only to do it and to let others observe organically what happens. That's good.
Yeah.
But leaders have to go further. And they have to then take advantage of their one-on-one relationships with their peer
agree,
leaders and say, hey, let's talk about
Yeah.
how this is working for my team
Yeah.
and how I'm seeing perhaps you're struggling, and let me share some things, right?
Yeah.
And let's collaborate. How can we implement this more? Because I think we have a responsibility as leaders to lead. Not only our people and our teams, but other leaders as well, and allow ourselves to be led by them.
Yeah.
And allow ourselves to be led by our teams.
Yeah. 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 I think for me, I really encourage our listeners who are thinking through this. Because again, I feel like you and I have both been in a lot of conversations, especially in this era of disruption. What people are looking for is, kind of, okay, so how do I bring that into the workplace?
Yeah.
You've given us an example. I think for me, I don't, it's not about Andres and me kind of sitting here and saying, okay, do these 6 things, right? I do think it is, I love what you said about the difference between dilemma and paradox. That is honestly, even for me, as I listen to you, Andres, that gives me a different idea of permission to not lock myself in, because what that happens is, and this, especially in an era of disruption, we do tend to be like, oh my gosh, it has to be this. It has
and I have
to
to
be.
find the right
And I have
answer.
to,
The
right answer. Great point.
Right, as
Great
opposed to, let's navigate
Yeah.
our way to the paradox.
Yeah.
Which is different than choose the one path.
That's a great point.
Right?
That's
and,
a great point.
And again, going back to my wave metaphor, it's like, well, how do we ride and navigate through the paradox and to get to where we need to get to, regardless of how dangerous the wave is, regardless of what the wave has given us, right? Is to say, yes, but if we catch the wave, we can navigate through seemingly contradictory things to get to the best answer.
Yeah. Well, and then also, and you and I have talked about this as well, it's the idea that sometimes in the era of disruption, especially sustained disruption, the answer is disruption.
Exactly.
It
is disruption.
It is disruption.
Yeah. You cannot meet disruption with stability.
Or status quo.
Right. You have to disrupt the disruption, because the disruption is here.
It's here.
And
right.
has messed us up. And whatever it's messed up is gone.
Yeah.
Or modified forever.
Yeah.
So the way to not succumb to disruption is to allow whatever collateral damage it had, or whatever shift or drift is created in us. The only way to rectify that is to figure out, let's disrupt the disruption so we can course correct, not to back to where we were.
I was going to say, that's what I was going to say.
Course correct to navigate to where we need to be.
Yeah.
Given that we were vulnerable to this disruption.
Yep.
And now, but there's other status quo that are holding us in place.
There are.
That are vulnerable to our good disruption.
Yeah, I agree. No, and I think that what you said was really important, because I think oftentimes, and it's this concept of resilience, right? This idea of that, to me, I've always learned that resilience is where you kind of like bounce back, right? Something hits you and you kind of bounce back. To me, resilience is you absorb whatever has happened to you, whether it's disruption, chaos, whatever you want to call it, you learn from it and you have to move forward, either through it or with it.
With it. I would say
with
through
it. Yeah.
You got to go with it.
Yeah.
But you still want to get to where you need to get to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I actually think that's why some of the companies, and maybe we cut it, I'm not sure, but I'm just saying this to you right now. Some of the companies who have leaned into the disruption of COVID and said, we're going to go with this. We're just going to go with this. I have no clue what this is, but we're going to go with this. Versus the companies or people or families who have said, we're going to go back to something else, like RTO, right? Like return to work. And I do think that a lot of companies struggle, through that, because it is that idea of paradox versus dilemma. It's like, no, but I want to go back to pre-COVID. COVID.
Well,
I want to bring everybody
Well,
back.
let's bring it up a little bit more wide. Some of the polarization in this country, around the world, is in a time of great disruption of things that, the genie's out of the bottle with AI, right? The genie's out of the bottle with climate change, right? I mean, but some of the forces of reaction to those changes, guess, is exactly what you said. They want to go back, hard, pivot
years
back to how it was.
Yeah.
And that is causing significant pain
Yeah.
and attention right now.
Yeah.
But and it's an understandable reaction, right?
Absolutely.
When everything's uncertain, you want to go back to what you've known. The problem is that what we've known is not here
Doesn't
anymore.
exist. Yeah, it doesn't exist. And that's
hard.
hard.
Earlier this year, I went to a wonderful retreat conducted by the Modern Elders Academy, MEA. It's a great organization, and they're focused on helping people in midlife, defined as early 40s to late 60s, to figure out how do they transition through midlife change. And we talk a lot about adolescence, but they talk about middlescence. And they root their work in studies done by MIT, Harvard, Stanford. And if you think about adolescence, which we're all very familiar with, we've gone through it, we talk about adolescence. Those who are parents know that you have to mind the adolescent transition.
Yep.
So what does adolescence entail? Hormonal changes, physiological changes, psychological, emotional changes, relational changes, and identity changes. Well, what does midlife entail? Hormonal changes, physiological changes, right?
Yeah.
Psychological changes, identity changes, and relationship changes. But we don't mind it. We don't take care of it. We don't nurture it in the same way because we're successful and we're moving on and we're doing.
Great point.
But we don't realize that these changes are disrupting how things have been, and then we start being confused, and that's what leads to a lot of that midlife crisis thing. Is because suddenly we buffeted but all this stuff was working for me.
Yeah.
And so at this retreat, which I'm going to keep coming back to over and over because it's so pivotal for me in the midst of all my transitions, but there was a saying that really was shared at the beginning of the retreat, and it became my mantra for many of us there. And it's attributed to Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor and in a concentration camp. And he's written a seminal book called The Search for Meaning. But in this quote, no one could quite exactly find this quote, but it's kind of a compilation of things he said. But it's still attributed to him. And it goes like this. And I think it gets to what does it mean to lead in this time? Between the stimulus and the response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to prepare a response. And there, our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I think that leaders today are caught in a liminal space between what was and what isn't yet.
Yeah.
And rather than trying to rush through this space, what we learned is that the liminal space is a gift. It's a moment to just pause and say, okay, this is gone. Something new is emerging here, but we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But I got to lead myself and our people and our organization to whatever that new future is. But before I do, let me do the work of understanding what's going on.
Yeah.
And part of understanding what's going on is before I understand what's going on for others in my organization, in the world, I better understand what's going on for me.
Sure.
So let me get centered.
Yeah.
Let me understand how this disruption is affecting my physiological, psychological, emotional, relational identity things, where I have to let go of certain things because they're gone or they're not helpful. Where is it that I have to incorporate new habits, new ways of thinking? And where is it that I have to build the practices to do that?
Yeah.
And only then can I start centering myself. And once I'm more centered, then I can go and help my organization and my people and my family to act in more centered ways and move to the change.
So I again, I kind of keep defaulting back to say, if I was a listener and I was enjoying this conversation, I would say, yeah, but you also promised me, like, what are my takeaways? What are some things that I can think about? So let's talk about that, Andres. How can we kind of give some takeaways and give some direction, to our listeners?
Yeah, so let's summarize a little bit.
Yep.
I think number one, in a world of center, to lead in that, start with centering yourself. That would be the first one.
Yep. I also think the second one is that, and it's just a realization, it's just the ability to, kind of accept it, is that it's okay not to go back. We're not going back. Disruption in the era of disruption, the answer is disruption itself.
Exactly, but with intention. And that, I would say number three then, is in order to do that, two characteristics of someone of character is that they know who they are and they know their purpose. And if you can't answer the question of who you are, what's your identity, and you don't know your purpose, then you don't move forward and lead until you can answer those questions.
Yeah. And I also liked, and I would say I would tag on one of the things too that I also like, which was very practical, is this idea that sometimes we tend to do this alone, where we think that we need to do this alone. But there's also there's also an opportunity to look to your team. There is such diversity among your team or among, colleagues and friends. You have the opportunity to lead with your team, but there's also an opportunity to lead among leaders. I love that, so much. So that's a really good thing to think about. You have such an opportunity to disrupt the way that you are and allow your team to also help you, and thereby you are then giving permission to other people to then be vulnerable and to try new ways.
So in terms of just a takeaway, simply don't do it alone.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier.
It's a lot easier, my gosh.
Yeah. And, and I think, be humble. And humble means relinquish the power trappings. Relinquish the need to hold the front.
Yeah.
And as hard as that might feel, it is liberating.
I agree. And so that's the biggest thing before I kind of want to close, and I'm going to ask you for a favor here. You started this by helping me to understand that this was not a one or the other. This was you were either in a paradigm. Paradox. I keep saying paradigm. I think that we are so used to looking at dilemmas and saying, I have to make a choice. I have to, and I have to make that choice. And I can only do this, and I have a very small period of time. What you have allowed us to think through, Andres, is this idea of paradox, that you don't have to do one or the other. And if you can become comfortable in doing both, that actually gives you a lot more freedom to make a lot more decisions. And so in that, you've talked a lot to me about living in this space.
Yeah, and paradox, it doesn't mean you can address everything. Paradox management and navigation means you learn how to prioritize and which are the things you got to let go of. And then you, in a sense, you kind of simplify the complexity of paradox, right? But rather than having, a dozen different competing things, slough off the ones that are not essential and then face the essential ones. And then the essential ones may then face each other and seem paradoxically contradictory, but now you go, these two things are true, and now let's navigate through.
So as we close, I know that, one of the things that a lot of our listeners don't know about you is that as you allowed yourself to go through some personal and professional disruption, you actually found a different part of your voice. You are a journalist by trade. You have been a writer your whole life. And I think, Andres, that you've written poetry in the past,
No.
Oh, you've not?
No, never.
Golly, that's hard to believe because, so listeners, he's been sharing with me recently some poetry that has just blown me away, and some personal things, but also some things that I think are applicable to today's conversation. So I'm just going to ask you for it.
Sure.
The one about liminal space.
Yeah.
Could you share that with our listeners?
Sure.
Because I think that that's first of all, two reasons. A, it's a really good poem. And B, you all don't know what you're missing because he has used his skill as a writer and a journalist and disrupted it a little bit and turned it into this other space of poetry.
Yeah, and as I scroll through and find it, most of this poetry comes out in Spanish.
Yeah, right.
That I was translated in English, but once in a while it comes out in English and I translate it. But for our viewers, I will read the English version. But no, there's a Spanish version that maybe we'll publish on our site.
Yeah.
But in terms of disrupting myself, I'm a nonfiction writer, journalist, middle school journalism. I've written 6 books, and 5 of them are business books.
Right.
So, they were, a journalist is about the facts and the argument, and same as a business writer. But poetry is a whole different voice. And I haven't written until I was going through this adolescence and a lot of changes in my life, which we'll talk about as we go through episodes and how you have your journey.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find a way to use my prose or my essay writing to really express what I was going through. And
I don't know if I knew that was a catalyst, or not necessarily a catalyst, but like a stopping point for that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yes, and for sure. And I was not, as a writer, wasn't coming up with the words.
Wow.
And people say, "Oh, you should journal." But for me, journaling as a writer is work. Because then everything I wrote in my journal, I had to,
That's really
I kept focusing on getting it just right.
Yeah.
And then some things happened in my personal life that sort of awoke me, and awoke a part of me that had been dormant for a while, given a lot of the trauma that had been happening. And then suddenly this poetic voice just started coming out, and I started expressing what I was feeling through poetry. And poetry, especially free-form poetry, allows us to express ourselves without really worrying about the grammatical structure and the punctuation and so this one is actually and I will share these over time because I think it'll be relevant to our work, play, relationships, and society. But this one's about liminality because we introduced this. So liminality, that space between what was and what is not yet, is all around in time and place, where the waves meet the shore, where a child lets go of their parents' hands on the first day of school, where a daughter goes to college, when one starts a new job, when one leaves a lifelong partner, when one leaves a long-time job, where it's the space between your lips and mine and the breath before the touch, where one stops holding on to be able to let go, and in the free fall, where one abandons long-cherished thoughts and long-standing ways of being and doing, where one takes on a new practice, habit, purpose, where one starts to take risks to release the certain, to pursue the unknown, and in the unknown discover what ourselves have wanted us to know all along, where one says, "I love you," and waits for the response.
Worth it to listen to. Thanks for joining us. Disrupt, the podcast where we talked about leadership in the era of disruption. Thanks for being here.
Adios. See you next time.